for somebody who doesn't know, for a business, whatever type of entity, why are podcasts something that they should look into for their marketing?
Podcasts, it's still growing, number one, but it allows for, I would argue and say, deeper relationships, from developing deeper relationships and having deeper relationships with whatever that audience may be, right? That's the most important thing. Being able to do that, being able to produce content catered to them, if that makes sense. Being able to also take that and make it more premium content. So for your loyalists, the person who is constantly buying your product, dedicated to you, they're on social media, tagging you, having podcasts also talk, producing podcasts to talk about those things, or giving them value-added content, members-only content, if you will, for those loyalists. Those are some ways that they could use it, definitely.
Well, I guess you mentioned building deeper relationships. I guess could you just kind of briefly go into why is that important, and how do podcasts help you do that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Deeper relationships, obviously, number one, it's very hard to convert, get someone to buy whatever that is. There's a lot of work, a lot of resources that go into that. And once you have them, you obviously want to keep them. You obviously want to have that kind of relationship with them. You also want to build them into, being a loyalist. So taking that content or producing a podcast, if you will, if you have that ideal person, or who that ideal demographic may be, and knowing what they're interested in because they've done business with you, they interacted with your brand, and then you can produce that type of content, podcast, or I like to say even micro podcasts, being able to give them that's part of that deeper relationship thing. That's part of keeping them. And then on top of that too, the idea of podcasts where you're not stuck behind a screen to, it's not a video, which is not a bad thing, but it's not a video. You're not logging in on social media, which is also not a bad thing. They're actually subscribing to your content on their mobile device, and they could literally be getting dinner ready for the night and listening to this type of content that you've produced for them.
I guess, and let's talk about that a little bit. Just the format of a podcast is different, and it's, you consume it differently. It's not like something on Facebook where you're going to see it fly through your feed or something like that. You have to take a little bit more deliberate action with a podcast.
Yeah.
And it is something that's, I don't know, but the average length is like an hour long, and you're actually listening to it as opposed to just sort of maybe being vaguely aware of it.
Right.
Like you are on another social media channel. So I guess, could you talk about maybe how the format and how podcasts are different, and maybe how that's a benefit to people who use them?
Yeah, it's different in a lot of ways, and I'll keep it with marketing. I say this with some of our customers that, social media marketing is awesome. It really and truly is very powerful, but it's rented space at the end of the day. So you have to be on Facebook to get that particular ad or that particular thing. Podcasts, and we'll say video marketing too. When you look at YouTube, there's the video marketing aspect of it. You're kind of glued to your phone, and depending on what you're looking at and the algorithms and all that other stuff, all that stuff is stuff that you can't control. When you look at podcasting, when you look at the audio, once I'm aware of what you have, and let's say I'm a customer and I find out that you are doing that, all I literally have to do is just subscribe to you. There is no algorithm controlling what I see on the screen, or, into the mix of what I've recently played, if you will, on video. I've subscribed to you. There's our connection. I'll get an alert if I opt for that every time you post up, content, or you produce a podcast, I'll get alert for that. And if I'm your follower, cool. I necessarily don't have to watch it and worry about it disappearing off my screen. I know that there's alert. I maybe have a week until your next production, or a couple of weeks. I can listen to it at any time, driving to work for 40 minutes to an hour. Like I said, cooking dinner, doing laundry, whatever. I have that connection with you.
How are podcasts sort of kind of a more intimate way to communicate with your audience, if that's the right word, than traditional social media or even traditional advertising?
Yeah, it's more intimate, and that's a good word to use. It's a deeper relationship, for the very notion of that content, number one, is being produced for you, but just the simple fact that you are subscribing to it. I am subscribing to hear your content, your podcast. and listen to that and digest that. So when you look at social media, even though you may like that page or anything like that, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to see what I post. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get it at the time I need you to get that. However, when you go to podcasting, that connection has already been made once you subscribe to it. You're listening, and maybe you're even engaging in a certain way, whether that's through email or through some survey or what have you. But that's the big thing when you start talking about that relationship, being able to subscribe to the push of a button. We're connected.
Do you have any tips for maybe a business who's thinking, maybe they can't see how what they do could translate into content for a podcast? Or any tips for once somebody starts doing that, maybe avoid this type of content or make sure your content is something like this?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many ways. Most of the time people, and we get this, when you think of podcast, it has to be a series and it has to be long form and it has to be this because we're so used to, I won't mention any podcasts. There are some awesome ones. I don't want to market for them, if you will, but there's some that we just subscribe to that we listen to all the time. And so we think that we have to have that exact type of thing. And you don't. Businesses, nonprofits, municipalities, for-profit businesses, manufacturing, there's always these opportunities to leverage a podcast, right? Leverage audio marketing, if you will. And that is highly dependent on, I always say this, it depends on your audience first. Like that's the most important thing, because when you start looking at demographics of podcasts, not every age demographic listens to podcasts. Like there's data out there that can show you that. It is gender neutral. I think it's 52% male, 48% female. So it's a nice balance, right there. But there's so many opportunities for do that. And I can give you an example. Let's say you're a chef. Right. And you have a nice restaurant or what have you. But instead of kind of talking about the restaurant and what you're doing, all that, maybe tell the story about food, maybe tell the story about ingredients or, the history of a certain dish or something like that. So there's an opportunity there. A municipality or let's say a nonprofit, you can do some audio storytelling. So whatever that nonprofit's mission is, creating, doesn't necessarily have to be long, but you can create audio podcasts or podcasts, if you will, just telling that story. So as a donor of that nonprofit or as a volunteer or what have you, I have a relationship and I'm hearing content that you're putting out. So it's a variety of different ways. So you don't have to get stuck in that notion of you have to stick to this one theme or one idea. You could really make it cater to your audience and what you do.
And if somebody is wanting to get started in this, I guess, how difficult is it to begin creating podcasts? What do you need? What do you need to know?
Sure.
How do you do it?
Well, and I'm not saying this because our nature of our work, but it's difficult. And I'm going to say this, if it is equipment and things like that, there's a lot of research, very easy to do. That part's easy. When you start getting into the technical side, whether you're looking at audio quality, so I guess I'll say, depending on that organization of business's real intent, right? If they are serious about podcasting or using podcasting as a marketing piece, the content needs to be a good production. So getting equipment, that part's kind of easy. If you have the space, that part's kind of easy. Sound quality, that's when it starts getting difficult. But one of the biggest things is just the production. Great, we're going to do a podcast. What are we going to do it on? We're going to do it on this, but how do you formulate that? And how do you get that into a production to where it's doing exactly what it needs to do, which is to build those relationships with the audience? So I say it's difficult once you get past looking for equipment.
Somebody might be thinking, I recorded a podcast. I went in through all of this work. I posted it up there. That's one thing. Do you know what I mean? Are there opportunities to sort of to leverage that further, to get more out of that, to make it live longer and keep interacting, even though you've only recorded one podcast until you get to the next one?
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. We were talking to a client, we're still talking to him, and that was one of the concerns. Like, okay, we do this and then like it's done. And there's so many opportunities. Number one, it's evergreen content. So I'll use us an example with one of our in-studio podcasts. We did it right before, I think it was around April, and, was celebrating motherhood. So not only can we repurpose that for the following year, But at the same time, when you have an audio, when you have 1 hour of content, whether you interviewing or, whether it's a monologue, you can take that podcast and splice that up into more content. Whether it's, if I'm interviewing you and you said something poignant, or I'm just advertising that you were on our podcast, you can use it for that. So there's so much flexibility in that 1 hour podcast or even less that you can splice that up into sound bites and then take that sound bite and leverage that on all your website or on your social media platforms. There's just tons of ways that you can do it. So it doesn't have to be one podcast and then you're done. You can repurpose that. You can take that podcast and, set it aside, put it in an email campaign and let some of your other email subscribers know that it's there, use it that way. But again, you can splice that up and make that into 3 or 4 different pieces, 20-second pieces of a wonderful interview that I did with you. And then your comment, your poignant comment on there.
Is there anything else you want to mention or any other tips or best practices you want to talk about?
I think the only thing with best practices, it goes back, to what I mentioned, like really and truly for business, if they're going to put this podcast out, really kind of leverage, or at least, put some thought into, the production side of things. Don't just do it to say, hey, we got to get a podcast out there, be very deliberate in how you're going to strategically do this. And then importantly, who's going to be the listener, the 22 to 25-year-old may not be the one, even though they're probably in your base, they may not be the ones that listen. It may be the older ones like myself who, we enjoy podcasts. So really put some thought into how you're going to produce this thing, how you're going to do it. If not, you're going to waste a lot of money.
Educate to dominate your industry by joining our Business Strategies Video Network. Raise your profile, build trust with your clients, and drive sales leads with video content that works for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and 365 days a year. The Business Strategies Video Network. Contact our sales and marketing team to get started today.